It is with deep sadness that I announce the death of Pope Francis. He has died, but while some people receive the news with tears, others were dark with fear, because his death was the fulfillment of a prophecy, an ancient prophecy that had been hidden for centuries in the secret archives of the Vatican, the prophecy of Saint Malachy. 900 years ago, the monk Malachy was walking along the ancient cobblestone streets of Rome when he was overwhelmed by a vision. It was not a dream, nor a hallucination, but a glimpse of the future of the Catholic Church. In his ecstasy, Malachy witnessed the impossible, a long line of popes, one by one, marching through the centuries until the end of time. Malachy recorded these images in 112 Latin phrases, each one corresponding to a future pope, carrying its own symbolism and warning, until the last one, the 112th pope, called Peter the Roman. After him, there would be no more popes, only judgment. Today, they have been crossed out, because Pope Francis is the 112th pope since Celestine II, just as Malachy had recorded. What he wrote was the final link in a chain of prophecy that spanned 9 centuries. And today, that chain has been broken. The first 111 mottos of the prophecy are symbolic, short as poetry, but describe each pope with astonishing precision: their coat of arms, their birth date, their character, or their destiny. But with the final motto, the 112th, the tone changes. No longer a simple phrase, but a long and ominous warning. In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, Peter the Roman will reign, who will shepherd his flock amid much suffering. When these things are finished, the city on 7 hills will be destroyed, and the terrible judge will judge his people. Malachy's prophecy gives 3 clear clues about the final pope. He will be the 112th pope. He will be named Peter. He will be of Roman descent and will rule during a time of great turmoil. There is no denying that Pope Francis is the 112th since Celestine II, just as Malachy said. For centuries, it was thought that the final pope would be named Peter, born in Rome, a recognizable name. But like all ancient visions, the prophecy speaks in symbolism. And now, looking back, it all comes together in a chilling way. Francis was born in a modest house in the Flores neighborhood of Buenos Aires. But his blood was not Argentine, it was Italian. His parents were Italians, immigrants from the Piedmont region of northern Italy, leaving an Italy ravaged by fascism and crisis, in search of a more dignified future for their children in Argentina. In other words, Francis was Roman by blood, by heritage, by origin tied to the spiritual heart of the Church. His real name was not Peter, as the prophecy had indicated. His birth name was Jorge Mario Bergoglio. But when he was elected pope, he was asked what name he wanted. He did not hesitate. He looked at the cardinal and answered, Francis. He chose not the name of an emperor, nor the name of a doctrine, but the saint of the poor and the abandoned, Saint Francis of Assisi, who gave up everything to embrace lepers, the barefoot, and rebuild the church with only faith and charity. Few people remember, however, that the saint's real name was Giovanni di Pietro di Bernard I, that is, Giovanni, son of Peter, a man with the most iconic name of all, Peter. And so, Pope Francis became the very embodiment of the prophecy, the 112th pope, bearing the symbol of Peter and Roman blood. There was one last thing in the prophecy. He will shepherd his flock amid much suffering. Francis's reign has not been a period of peace, nor has it been a period of religious splendor. It is exactly what the prophecy foretold: tribulation. His faith began with a painful event. As a young man, he began to feel a dull pain in his side, then a persistent fever, and then shortness of breath. He could not breathe. His parents immediately took him to the hospital, where the doctors looked at him gravely. The diagnosis was made quickly: a severe lung infection with life-threatening cysts. The disease had progressed too far, and his right lung was severely damaged. The doctors had no choice but to remove part of his right lung. The surgery was risky, and the aftermath was painful. He lay immobile for days, unable to stand up on his own. But it was in that cold room, amid the tubes, the white coat, and the silence, that something happened. It was there, for the first time in his life, that he came face to face with the fragility of human existence. He realized that he was not invincible, that his body could collapse, and that death could come at any moment without warning. But he was not afraid. On the contrary, he had an extraordinary clarity. While others prayed for his health, he prayed for something deeper, to understand the meaning of pain. He did not ask God to take away the pain, but to give it a purpose. From then on, he was no longer the same person. He understood that every breath was a miracle. And if God let him live, then God had a mission for him, something great. Just a few months after his recovery, with his body still weak and his breathing limited, he made a decision. His life belonged to God. From the first day of his pontificate, Francis has faced a barrage of criticism for who he is. For the first time in history, a pope is not European, and he is a Jesuit. He faces a deeply wounded church, engulfed by sexual abuse scandals that are exploding on every continent. Victims are speaking out, shame is spreading, and the cry for justice can no longer be ignored. Francis has made no secret of the gravity of the problem. He has publicly apologized, wept with the victims, and initiated a sweeping reform to end impunity. But it has not been easy. Behind every scandal, there are systemic silences, power structures, and networks that resist any attempt at transparency. And that wound is nothing compared to another: internal division. The cracks within the church were more evident than ever. Deep divisions among cardinals, conflicts between progressives and conservatives, and growing distrust of the power structures within the Vatican. In a press conference on a return flight from his first papal visit to Brazil, Francis said, "If a homosexual accepts God and has goodwill, who am I to judge?" From that moment on, the most conservative sectors of the church began to see him as a threat. They accused him of relativizing the faith, of being vague, of being too progressive. Some cardinals even wrote public letters asking him to explain. Some accused him of heresy without evidence. They compared him to Paul VI, John Paul II, even Luther. But Francis did not rebut. He did not defend. He just kept going quietly, with a calm face, a slow step, and a conviction stronger than any criticism. Because he knew that he had not come to please, but to serve. And that any true reform, before it can bear fruit, must be painful. Despite the pressures, Francis never wavered from his vision. For him, the future of the church lies not in contraction, but in openness. He constantly emphasized a word that made many uncomfortable: synodality, a church that walks together, discerns together, listens to the Spirit, not only among the clergy, but also among the laity, among women, among those who have never been heard. He defended a more egalitarian, less clerical church, where everyone has a voice. A church that includes the excluded, migrants, women, divorced people, those who have been abandoned for centuries, not as a strategy, but as a mission. But even as he works to transform the church, he has his critics. Some say he is too soft, others too hard. Social media amplifies his every gesture, his every word. But the problem is not just within the church. Francis's pontificate coincides with one of the most turbulent periods of the modern world. Wars like the one in Ukraine, persecutions of Christians in the East, climate crisis, economic crisis, and a global culture increasingly hostile to faith. Then in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Shrines were closed, pilgrimages were suspended, public life paralyzed for millions. Francis stood alone in an empty St. Peter's Square in the rain before the Blessed Sacrament exposed in public. That image of silence and pain is a portrait of the soul of the world. And in the darkness that seemed to hide God himself, the Pope said, "We are not alone." It was one of the most powerful moments of his pontificate. For in the midst of the greatest collective helplessness of the century, Francis chose to stand firm. Despite his dwindling number of believers, and his traditional faith being questioned both inside and outside the church, he continued. One of his most daring trips was to Iraq, a country ravaged by war and extremism, where no pope had ever dared to set foot. There, he met with Muslim and Christian leaders and called for a possible coexistence that was stronger than fear. Francis reached out to Muslim, Jewish, and Orthodox leaders. He met with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, the supreme leader of Sunni Islam, in a gesture that broke centuries of tension between Christianity and Islam. At that meeting, they signed a historic document on human fraternity, defending respect, peace, and justice across religious boundaries. He met with Jewish leaders, reaffirming their common roots and committing to remember the Holocaust. He wept at the walls of Auschwitz and embraced the victims of anti-Semitism. He also built bridges with the Orthodox, in particular with the patriarchs of Constantinople and Moscow. In Cuba, he held a historic meeting with Patriarch Kirill, the first embrace between Rome and Moscow in over 1,000 years. Francis's reign has not been a bed of roses. From the start, he knew that the 21st century would bring challenges as complex and ancient as these. Yet Francis has led his flock through the darkness. He has moved on, he has reformed, he has denounced, he has embraced the outcast and challenged the powerful. But his leadership was uncomfortable. It was painful, controversial, and relentlessly demanding. From the very first day, his style provoked resistance. He did not wear a red robe, did not live in a palace, did not speak Latin. He did not impose. He listened. For Francis defined himself from the very beginning as the Pope of Mercy. His episcopal motto says it all: Miserando ac elegendo. He looked upon you with mercy and chose you. This phrase recalls the moment when Jesus, walking, saw Matthew, a tax collector, a sinner, and chose him as a disciple. Francis did not justify sin, but he did not condemn the sinner. He invited the faithful to step out of the logic of punishment into the logic of embrace. He summoned missionaries of mercy, priests authorized to forgive sins reserved to the Pope. He called on confessors to be more like fathers than judges. He visited prisons, hospitals, refugee camps. He washed the feet of migrants, of women, of people of other religions. Every gesture, every word, every moment of silence said the same thing. Mercy is not weakness. It is the strongest face of love. And it is this face, the face of Christ, that Francis wants to show the world. The prophecy said, Peter the Roman will shepherd his flock through many tribulations. That is the reign of Francis. And now, as it was foretold, it has come to an end. But the prophecy had one last sentence. And when these things are finished, the city with 7 hills will be destroyed, and the terrible judge will judge his people. The end. A short line, but devastating. It does not simply mark the end of a list of popes. It marks the end of an era. The city with 7 hills is not a metaphor. In Revelation 17, the Bible says clearly, the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. That city is not a mystery. It is Rome. It is also the city that Saint Malachy prophesied would be destroyed after the last pope, a place where judgment would fall. But the destruction of which the prophecy speaks is not necessarily fire or bombs. It could be a spiritual collapse, a profound purification. For the prophecy does not end with destruction, but with judgment. The terrible judge shall judge his people. This is not just for the wicked, but for believers as well. The prophecy of Saint Malachy was never simply a warning about the end times. Although many consider it a myth, its chillingly accurate fulfillment silenced even the skeptics. The first to be mentioned was Celestine II in 1143, nicknamed ex Castro Tiberius, from the Tiber. And in fact, Guido di Castello, his real name, was born in the Tiber region and served as cardinal in a church next to the San Angelo Castle, on the river that crosses Rome. This is not a symbolic interpretation. It is a precise geographical coordinate. Centuries later, the prophecy has continued to be true. John Paul I, elected in 1978, was called de Mediatate Luni, of the crescent moon. He was elected on a half-moon night and died just 33 days later on another half-moon night. That short, mysterious reign still gives rise to many theories. A half-moon is prophesied. His successor, John Paul II, was called de Labor Solis, of the work of the sun, or eclipse. Wojtyła was born on May 18, 1920, on the day of a solar eclipse, and died on April 8, 2005, also on another eclipse. His life was like a moving sun, traveling the world, preaching, uniting, witnessing to the faith. A working sun until the end. Next, Benedict XVI, nicknamed Gloria Olivae, glory of the olive tree. Some people link this to the Benedictine order, which is considered the spiritual olive branch. Others see a connection to his peaceful, quiet demeanor and profound theological thought. The name Benedictus, perhaps he himself chose it to confirm the prophecy? These are not isolated examples. One after another, the mottos of Malachy's prophecy have been eerily consistent with the biographies, personalities, and ministries of popes. A list that seemed poetic, it has now become a prophetic archive. And the last pope, the last guardian of the church before the judgment, has died. Francis, if he is indeed the last pope as prophesied, then what is coming is no longer an election, but a transition into the unknown. The question arises, urgent. If Francis is the last pope, then who will succeed him? Will the next one be an impostor? Will the papacy no longer be that of a shepherd, but that of a wolf in sheep's clothing? Many prophetic and apocalyptic scholars believe it is inevitable. Francis's successor could be the false prophet, the figure mentioned in Revelation 13 who appears pious but speaks like a dragon. He has two horns like a lamb, but he speaks like a dragon. The warning is resounding. It can no longer be ignored. If Francis is the last pope, who will be next? Is he preparing the way for the Antichrist? And Malachy's prophecy is not alone. The Bible has been warning for centuries, and now we are seeing it begin to take shape. St. Paul wrote in his letter to the Thessalonians, "Before the return of the Lord, there will be a great apostasy, and the man of lawlessness will be revealed." Jesus in Matthew 24 also said it more clearly than anyone. He said that before the end comes, there will be wars, famines, plagues, and earthquakes. He called it the beginning of sorrows. And now look around us. Global pandemics, natural disasters, nations on the brink of war, moral and spiritual violence spreading like an invisible virus. This is not a coincidence. It is a sequence. For years, these verses of Scripture were only distant warnings. But today, after the death of Pope Francis, they're close, real. It is all written. The faith will be betrayed, and the wicked will be revealed. False leaders, those who pretend to be messengers of God. But even in the darkness, there is light. The death of Pope Francis may be the end of an era, but not the end of faith, because faith does not die with us. Faith endures, and is refined in trials. And now more than ever, this is not a call to fear, but a wake-up call. Wake up. Abandon the lukewarmness of your heart. Turn your eyes to God with sincerity, humility, and urgency. For we do not know what is coming, but we know who holds it all. Stay awake, for you do not know the day or the hour. And for this reason, Pope Francis did not leave behind palace or great stone structures. He left behind a legacy that is harder to build and impossible to destroy. A living legacy. He was a pope who broke all protocol, opened the door, who stepped down from the balcony of the Vatican to be with the people. He did not seek to impose, but to listen. He chose consistency over applause, truth over political calculations. His legacy is to restore to the world the most authentic image of Christianity. He repeated, "The face of God is present in those who suffer." He reformed the church, not only with decrees, but with a culture of encounter. He defended mercy as the heart of the gospel message. He lived dialogue, taught with truth, and the most difficult thing, with humility. In a punitive society, he spoke of second chances. He did not build a perfect church, but a church that was closer, more human, more authentic. And thanks to him, the church has courageously returned to its roots, to Jesus. Now one thing is clear. Pope Francis has departed. His mission is complete. And now, after years of steadfastness amid storms, living with dedication and courage, he has risen to meet the one he served. May his soul find the peace which he so often asked for humanity. May heaven open its arms to him. Rest in the Lord, Pope Francis. Amen.